What up, Cavs Nation? I'm your host, Ethan Sands, and I'm back with another episode of the Wine and Gold Talk podcast. We are coming to you guys after another Cavs win, 129-123 over the second-seeded Western Conference Memphis Grizzlies. And this was a dogfight for multiple reasons, Chris and Jimmy. And I'm not just talking about the scuffle between Desmond Bane and Donovan Mitchell after a timeout was called that saw both benches clear, and a little bit of an altercation between multiple different players where 4 different technical fouls were distributed. Chris, what did you hear behind the scenes on what was going on? I know you guys got to talk to Donovan after the game. What was said, and how was he feeling after having all that happen? I know he kind of walked away with a smile in the middle of the scuffle anyway.
Well, Jared Allen walked away with a smile. Darius Garland was laughing. Donovan walked away with a smile. Nobody really went too much into it. You know, the Grizzlies didn't really want to touch it. Donovan just said it was 2 guys that were competitive, that were getting after it. There was a loose ball. Donovan went to the floor. Desmond Bane went to the floor. He said, yeah, there's history between him and the Grizzlies, clearly. But the guy that he had history with is no longer there. He's now in Houston. It's Dylan Brooks. So it wasn't that big of a deal to the players in the locker room, although I will say that Ty Jerome, who has no filter whatsoever, and he just doesn't give a bleep, and he's just going to say whatever is on his mind, whatever the first thing is that comes to his mind, so much so that I think Cavs PR is going to start cutting off some of his interviews before he goes down a certain kind of road. Ty called it childish, a childish scuffle, because, like, you know, some of the things that happened after the fact were pretty unnecessary, with players coming from both sides and intervening. And even Kenny Atkinson talks about it. He's like, I don't know why they didn't just let, you know, Donovan and Dez kind of have their thing where they were going back and forth with the basketball. I don't know why Ja had to come over. I don't know why Tristan had to come over. I don't know why Zach Edey had to do what he did. So that's kind of the feel from the Cavs side of things, at least. But, you know, watching a lot of the replays, every time Donovan would try to get up, and he kind of did put his nuts in the face of Desmond Bane, by the way. But every time he tried to get up, like, Desmond Bane grabbed his leg and, like, turned it. So that's going to make players mad. That's going to make Donovan mad. It's going to make Tristan mad if he sees it. It's going to make a lot of the Cavs players want to come to Donovan's defense. It's Donovan Mitchell, for crying out loud. You know, everybody is going to come to his defense. And it's the Cavs, one of the most connected teams in the NBA. Guys are going to come to their teammates' defense. So, you know, I thought what Desmond Bane did was pretty unnecessary with grabbing Donovan's leg and twisting it. I thought to some degree Donovan stepping over him and putting his junk in his face was kind of unnecessary as well. And then he did the thing of like, nah, I'm not doing anything. My hands are up. My hands are up. But I thought, you know, in terms of NBA scuffles, it was almost like a nothing burger. I did like the way that the Cavs handled it, though. They didn't get overly emotional. They didn't let it take them out of their game. They didn't let the physicality bother them. Stood their ground, fought back, and won the game. And that's what you do in moments like that.
I would contrast that with the Pistons end of game situation. Was that a month ago or something when Darius hit the game winner? Probably not even that long. It was like 3 weeks ago, where Jarrett lost his cool against, was it Asar Thompson? That results in free throws. That's a one-way thing, and the Cavs, whether it was related to the scuffle or not, kind of fall apart down the stretch there and almost give it away, and then Darius saves the day with the long game winner. I think that's growth right there. I think that, to Chris's point, that everyone just so unnecessary. Everyone's it's like the bottom of a fumble pile. Like, everyone's poking eyes and getting mad at each other, and then they get back up and you put a microphone in front of their face, and then Desmond Bane, I'm trying so hard. I'm in the Grizzlies locker room. Just, what happened? Why did you get upset? What escalated it? Because at one point, Desmond Bane is like looked like he was like charging Donovan and like yelling at him. And Desmond Bain would like deadpan. He goes, "Oh, I wasn't mad." It's like, what? We saw you. you're on video here. I think the childish part is, and I know this is a thing. It's like a hustle thing. But why do we need to wrestle for the ball after the whistle is blown? Why do we need to do that? I think this whole thing is avoided if we end up doing that. And I didn't see what Chris was saying about Donovan getting his leg pulled. If that happens, I think it's fair game for the Cavs to step in and do something. And then once one teammate steps in, one group of teammates steps in, the other group of teammates are going to step in, whatever. But like, I also thought it could have been born of I thought it was like about the way Donovan got up because he was on top of Desmond. Like he might have propelled himself to get up like he literally needed to. And Desmond took that as like, oh, you're like shoving me into the ground or something like that. It's just a lot of times I think that these guys are trying to play it a little bit too coy in these situations. I generally think this time it was just the heat of the moment. We're in our aggro competitive mode and then snap out of it. It's all good.
And I talked to Tristan Thompson after the game. I stuck around in the locker room after the game to talk with Tristan, especially when Donovan was going to the podium. And he was like, I don't give a bleep who it was on the floor. I don't give a bleep who it was anywhere. Like, I'm going to go in there, and if I see people coming from the other team, I'm going to be the wall in between everybody. I'm going to be the separator. And I know a lot of our listeners and Cavs fans understand that they might not be like the enforcer type, but I definitely feel like this Cavs team is more physical, and they've talked about it. Evan Mobley admitted it after the game. They are more physical, stronger, bigger, have bigger players than they did just 2 years ago when they got bullied out of the New York Knicks series in the playoffs. So it's an understanding that, one, they know that they're bigger and stronger and can handle these situations, but it's also like this is the most connected group in the NBA, in my opinion. And it just shows that they're willing to have everybody's back. And obviously, John Morant, after Donovan getting up, John Morant kind of comes over and pushes Donovan into the stands. That doesn't help anything. That just brings the situation to a different level. Zach Edey kind of like being, and that's the other thing. I don't know what it is with the Grizzlies. It just feels like they always have like some huge dude that doesn't do a whole lot on the court, but like, if it comes to like needing to hold two people like against each other or away from each other with two hands, outstretched arms, that's what they got. The last person is Steven Adams, but Zach Edey basically did that, but he was doing more shoving than deterring as Steven Adams would have done his friendly giant self.
If Tristan Thompson is going to be the wall for the Cavs, and that's totally fine because that's his role. He wants to be the enforcer. Memphis is going to have one of those guys too, and that was Zach Edey in that case. But I like that Tristan was willing to do that. And he's always been willing to do that because, he understands it. He understands what it's all about. And I think there's something bigger in play here, whether the Cavs organization want to admit it or not, whether players want to admit it or not. I had one player in the locker room tell me tonight, he's like, yeah, if I was on the other team, I'd test us too, to see how real we are, to see how tough we are, given some of the things that have happened in the past. Your past follows you, no matter how long ago it was. And we can sit here and we can say that the Cavs are not the same team that got punked out of the playoffs by the Knicks, and they're not. They're not. 4 of their top 9 players in the rotation from Game 5 of that series are gone. Danny Green is retired in podcasting. Jetty Osman's overseas. Karis LeVert's in Atlanta. I mean, Lamar Stevens just came back in the NBA and is now on a 10-day contract with the Grizzlies. So this isn't the same team. It's not the same roster. But we've talked about this so many times on the podcast. Reputations are hard to shake. You've got to do something when it matters to shake that reputation. And it's clear that teams, whether it's Houston, Memphis, New York, any other team that you want to throw out there, it's clear that these teams want to test the Cavs and just see how they're going to respond to those things. And the thing that I thought was great from the Cavs standpoint is they weren't bothered by it. They weren't rattled by it. They just came together as a group the way that they always do. They made timely shots. They didn't allow Memphis to take the lead against them. They were calm. They were poised. They kept their emotions in check. And that's how you respond to those kinds of things. That's how you start to change those kinds of reputations. But it's going to keep happening. Of course it's going to keep happening. Because the Cavs don't care that there are teams around the NBA that are looking at this saying, hey, we might be able to get under their skin. We might be able to get in their heads. Like, the Cavs don't care because they know better. They know different. But it doesn't mean it's going to stop.
I would say it's a controlled aggression is what we're looking for out of the Cavs in these situations, right? I'll circle back on the Detroit Pistons thing that I said earlier. The prevailing sentiment coming off of that game from all of Jared Allen's teammates was, oh, we love it when he does things like that. I love it in the right moments. I didn't like it in that moment because it was like, you could say, okay, don't mess with Jared. You can't do this anymore. What I saw was a 22-year-old getting under Jared Allen's skin. If I was, to Chris's point, if I was a potential playoff opponent watching this, I would say, oh, well, I can get something. I can get a rise out of this guy. Tonight, much better. The Cavs handled it well. There's a lot of talk after the game, right? Kenny's talking about Donovan's equilibrium quality, how he's never too high, too low, how Donovan's even reining Kenny in at certain times. There's a way to do this, and there's a way not to do it. I think the Cavs did a really good job of managing emotions in that moment. By the way, I would say that the Grizzlies did not, and it's just funny to me how the franchise associated with grit and grind, the team that starts a lot of these skirmishes, the brashest kids on the block. I think what do they tell you at school, right? When you're being bullied, it's not about it's not about you, it's about the bully. There's something going on with the Grizzlies. That's what's happening there. I also find it funny that the wannabe bullies cannot secure a rebound. I mean, goodness. Like, they are
Jimmy,
not just the Cavs, but 22 offensive rebounds for the Cavs and 22nd in defensive rebounding. It's crazy. Yeah, I think that's a segue.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. And there's two different things that you mentioned. Time and place for the scuffle. I 100% agree. The Detroit Pistons game, the end of that game was not the time or the place. I think obviously the game was still close between the Cavs and the Grizzlies, but it made more sense in that time frame. The other thing that I'm going to disagree with you with is when you say that you can get a rise out of Jared Allen. I mean, he said after the game that he got slapped in the face. I don't care what situation you're in. If you slap me in the face, you're going to get a rise out of me. But I understand that it didn't, like the flagrant 2 and all that others, and then the rah-rah afterwards, that doesn't need to necessarily happen. But like, I think it's okay for you to have a response when somebody smacks you in the face, even if you are a friendly giant Jared Allen.
If they lose that game, it's a completely different conversation. That's all I'm saying. Darius Garland made a 40-footer, so good for Jared Allen for knocking Asar Thompson into next week after he got slapped in the face. I understand if you're getting slapped in the face. I get it. I'm just saying, in the competitive arena here, time and place matters a whole lot. And there's a way to let Asar Thompson know that's not okay without getting a flagrant 2 that can change the complexion of the game as well.
You're right, and I think it's also funny to the point I mentioned to you earlier in today's game that like the Cavs added that to their pregame video. The flagrant 2 that got Jared Allen ejected, that was in the little video montage that they put together that they play before the starters are announced every single game. I thought that was very telling. Chris,
again,
we've already
wouldn't
talked about
happen if they lost that game. Wouldn't happen if they lost that game.
I'm not disagreeing with you on that front. And Chris,
First
obviously,
home game back, it was in the video.
Yep. And Chris, we talked about the video, the song choice of the video already, so we'll circle back to that later. But Jimmy, you talk about the toughness of this team, the physicality of this team, and I think that segues into the second point, which is that the Cavs have 2 smaller guards, right? And we've had this conversation for a long time now. And in fact, we had the conversation with Kenny Atkinson today with friend of cleveland.com, Joe Varden, asking a question to Kenny Atkinson and said, well, do you think this is true? How do you go about a team that there hasn't been a championship history with two small guards? And Kenny Atkinson didn't let him finish the question, jumped in and was like, well, I don't consider Donovan Mitchell small. He's 6'3" on a good day, and has a 6'10" wingspan, right? Chris, what do you think about what Kenny said? And how do you kind of look at the situation with the guards, and also how they've had the two bigs behind them to kind of deviate from the situation of having them in the backcourt?
Yeah, look, I think when you have weaker defenders in the backcourt, or you have guys that have some physical limitations, in this case, Darius, the pieces that you put around those guys is pretty important. I think the Cavs know that. And when you have Jared Allen and Evan Mobley to protect those guys, to erase mistakes, when you have DeAndre Hunter on the perimeter hounding guys, or Max Strus or Dean Wade, it helps out. I think the truth is, when the Cavs get into a playoff environment, that Darius is going to get hunted. He is. Because for the Cavs, and it doesn't mean he's a bad defender, doesn't mean he's Jordan Poole out there. But when you're playing against the Cavs, you're going to try and prey on the weakest link. You're going to try and find the weakest link. It's like all these years ago, when the Cavs and the Warriors played in the finals, the Cavs kept going at Steph. And it's like that was supposed to be some kind of reflection on Steph, the defender. And it wasn't. It's the fact that, okay, we have the choice to go at Clay. Yeah, not the best idea. All right, we got the choice to go at Draymond. Yeah, probably don't want to do that. Let's go at KD. No, you know what I mean? So, when you're on this kind of team with that personnel, and you understand that the Cavs are going to do some things defensively from a switch standpoint, or when, sometimes in a playoff environment, it becomes matchup hunting, the teams are going to hunt Jalen Brunson. Just wait for it. It's going to happen. Teams are going to hunt Trae Young. They have for years. Teams are going to hunt Darius. They're going to test him. They're going to see if he's ready for that. They're going to see how he stands up to that. And it doesn't mean he's a bad defender. It just means in the grand scheme of playing against the Cavs, you feel like that's a good pathway to success. That's a better pathway to success than going at Donovan Mitchell, or going at Evan Mobley, or going at Jared Allen, or going at DeAndre Hunter or Dean Wade, or whoever else may be out there. So I understand why Kenny's defending his guys. He's always going to come to the defense of his players. If you have somebody, a reporter, calling Darius small, or insinuating that he's too small, and calling Donovan Mitchell, who's built like a pit bull, calling him small, the coach isn't going to allow that to happen. And he's certainly not going to agree with it. The other thing is, I don't think Donovan's a defensive liability. I think a couple years ago, toward the tail end of his career in Utah, when teams were hunting him and picking on him, he was having some problems defensively. And he was a pathway for another team to be successful. You don't see that same guy in Cleveland. He's put in more effort defensively, more attention to detail, more focused. He's got the wingspan. He's got the strength. So I don't agree with the standpoint that Donovan and Darius is a small backcourt. I think Darius is a small point guard. He's one of the smaller ones in the NBA, and physicality in the past has given him problems. Let's see how different that is this year.
I think Kenny's going to defend his guys always. I thought it was interesting that he got, in my opinion, a little defensive when it came to this conversation before the game with Joe Varden, asking a very good question that we've, again, talked about on the pod before, to smaller, however we want to delineate there, smaller guards, talking height here. The history is not long for those guys. Kenny tried off the top of his head to name some smaller backcourts. He came up with Isaiah Thomas and Joe Dumars. Been a minute since those guys were in the league. They're great, by the way. But it's been a minute since those guys were in the league. The list is not very long of those guys. And I think Kenny's reaction to me, which is let's narrow down what that was. I don't think Kenny necessarily took as much issue with the theory as he did with applying the theory to the Cavs. So I think that Kenny's a positive energy guy, right? He's can. So when you're asking him a can't question related to his teams, his guard's up already. And I think the fact that he was so quick to snap about it, again, I'm not trying to overplay this. Kenny didn't get mad, but he was very, very quick to denounce or try to question the premise of the question, because I think it's a real thing. I think we all understand it's not just like Darius is going to get targeted in the playoffs, but so is Donovan for a different reason. It's make the other team's best player work. By the way, the Cavs, Chris was talking about Jalen Brunson. The Cavs just did it a couple of days ago. One of the first plays the Cavs ran, the Knicks were like, we're going to put Jalen Brunson on Max Strus. Do something with that. Kenny was like, we're going to make Max Strus a playmaker. We're going to run him off some screens. We're going to make Jalen run around him. Guess what? Max Strus had a season-high 8 assists because he was getting in the paint. Jalen Brunson was having trouble getting around the screens. And you know what else happened that game? Jalen Brunson scored like the first 9 points for the Knicks, and he tailed off after a while. Because you know what?
Yep.
It's people like Jalen Brunson, people like Darius Garland, even Donovan Mitchell, Donovan Mitchell, I looked this up during the game, though he is 6'3", weighs more than 6'7" rookie Jalen Wells on the Memphis Grizzlies. Jalen Wells needs to eat some Lunchables, that's true, but Donovan is muscular. He's a big dude, and he is long. Well, I acknowledge that. But this is not just a defensive target. This is I think the reason the championship conversation is interesting in this regard is because it's can you hold up for the long haul kind of deal. Inherently, if you are 6'3" or below, however long your arms are, it's just harder. You have to work harder to score because you can't shoot over people, so you have to create space or you have to get past people and you have to attack the rim with a different kind of ferocity because you're in a smaller package. Yes, Donovan Mitchell is really small, but like if he gets bumped, he might go a little farther than your Jason Tatums and your Jaylen Browns. And Darius Garland, if he gets bumped, he might go a little farther than Donovan, and that stuff might wear on them. And what we're talking about here is the Cavs are trying to, this is why they're managing their minutes so carefully, they're trying to play a 100-game season right now, and they're trying to peak at the end of that 100-game season. That's a pretty complex equation, and when you have guys who have to work as hard to score, no matter how easy Donovan and Darius make it look, they have to work really hard to score. And you have to peak in the playoffs when the physicality is going to get ratcheted up and you're going to face better defenses and the refs might let a few more things go. And, I think 1 playoff minute feels like 3 regular season minutes, on and on and on. That's where this conversation becomes more relevant to me.
Okay, so that's really, really logical. That's well said. That's a good explanation. I will also add that there are touchy subjects for this organization. There are subjects that this organization does not like. There are questions and lines of questions that this organization does not like. I have received texts. I know other reporters have received texts as well about some of the questions or the line of questioning. So there are just every organization probably has the thing that bothers them that's said about them. And I can tell you that the Cavs being considered as having a small backcourt is something that bothers people in this organization. I can also tell you that this idea that they're not physical enough, that they are quote unquote soft, bothers people inside this organization.
Well, getting into the next portion of the podcast, basically discussing some of the physicality, and Jimmy and I had this conversation after the game. one of the biggest discussions coming into the contest was between Evan Mobley and Jaren Jackson Jr., obviously because Victor Wembanyama is no longer eligible to be in the DPOY conversation. So that puts Evan Mobley and Jaren Jackson Jr. on at the forefront of this conversation, the top two odds makers, predictions to receive the award. And I think it's extremely interesting when we talk about body type, when we talk about all these different things when it comes to Evan Mobley versus Jaren Jackson Jr. But, and I don't want to skip over Donovan's stat line either because he had a good game as well. Obviously, 33 points, 11 of 23 from the field, and 4 of 8 from deep, with 6 assists as well. But Evan Mobley, and I said this to somebody after the game when we were walking into the press room, for people that just watched the stat box, like, they might think that Jaren Jackson kept up with Evan Mobley for a majority of this game. No. That wasn't the case. Evan Mobley significantly outplayed Jaren Jackson Jr. And this is what I'm talking about. Evan finished with 25 points, was 10 of 20 from the field, 1 of 8 from deep, and had 13 rebounds and 8 assists, while also blocking 3 shots. Jaren Jackson Jr., 22 points, 9 of 18 from the field, 1 of 5 from deep. He just had 3 rebounds and 4 assists, while also stealing 2 passes and a block as well. I know I'm going to kind of tee this up for Jimmy to discuss his take on the rebounding situation, which has been a huge conversation between the Cavs and their offensive defensive rating throughout the season. But against one of the more physical, bigger, lengthy teams where we've talked about this season and guys having questions about, or and NBA executives having questions about the Cavs in these kinds of situations, the Cavs dominated on the glass, winning by 20 overall, 10 in each category, offensive and defensive rebounding. Jimmy, what does it say to you about Jaren Jackson Jr. and Evan Mobley in the debate, where Jaren Jackson Jr. might weigh more than Evan Mobley, but he can only come away with 3 rebounds when Evan Mobley comes away with 13?
Okay, so I'm going to sound like a pretty big Jaren Jackson hater over the next 3 to 5 minutes or so. So before I do that, I would like to say that Jaren Jackson Jr. is a phenomenal basketball player. He has already won a Defensive Player of the Year award, and well-deserved. He can guard legitimately every player on the court. He can switch on your smaller guards. He can hang in there. He can hang with the big with the big boys, bang bodies. He's a great shot blocker. He can get vertical. He's getting more steals this year. On and on and on. He's actually, Evan Mobley is at a different level of offensive renaissance. Jaren Jackson is having his own little offensive renaissance right now, becoming a much more involved part of their offense. He's not just shooting the threes anymore. I think he spent last year in the lab, basically, during their last year when everyone was hurt. They were just like, all right, let's see how much we can run through Jaren Jackson Jr. and see what sticks. And the answer ended up being, a lot. So it's great. Jaren Jackson Jr. is a very good basketball player. That being said, 6 rebounds a game at 6'10" is ridiculous. And this is one of the best rebounding seasons he has ever had. This is his second best rebounding season of Jaren Jackson Jr.'s career. He has logged multiple seasons in his NBA career where he was grabbing fewer than 5 rebounds per game as a freaking center. A center. Now you could say, as Taylor Jenkins did when I asked him about this before the game, that he shares the court with Zach Edey, and before that he shared the court with Steven Adams, who is a freaking rebound vacuum, one of the greatest rebounders of our time. Jonas Valanciunas as well. He's shared the court with other centers who grab a lot of rebounds. That's fine. The Memphis Grizzlies, who literally just drafted a mythical creature in Zach Fee-Fi-Fo Fum Edey, are 22nd in defensive rebound rate. With that size in the front court, unfathomable. Now, there are a couple of things happening here. They are small off in their second unit. Brandon Clark is their backup center. He plays sometimes without Jaren Jackson Jr. or Zach Edey. That doesn't help, although Brandon Clark is a very accomplished offensive rebounder. The Grizzlies also, because their half-court offense gets stuck in the mud, and man, it's ugly when it gets stuck in the mud, they try to run as often as they can, and there's a math issue with How many bodies do we send in transition versus how many bodies do we send crashing the rebounds? Do we have this rebound? Do we not? Maybe some of them think that their giants under the rim are going to get the rebound, and then they run in transition and they realize, oh, wait, Ty Jerome just got his own rebound against Zach Edey. How did that happen? Isaac Okoro just got his own rebound against Jaren Jackson Jr. How did that happen? Donovan Mitchell just got his own rebound. He's 6'3". Smaller, not small, smaller. Donovan Mitchell got his own rebound. Zach Edey's standing right there. What are you doing? The point here is this. If we're talking defensive player of the year, I spent a lot of time in the Grizzlies locker room after this game asking, how important is rebounding to defense? Sounds like a dumb question, right? Of course, it's the only way you can signify a stop. It's how you punctuate a stop. You basically didn't play defense until you get the rebound. And this guy is not very good at rebounding. Now you can say, well, Jimmy, Ethan, the 3 rebound stat you read, that's not fair because you see, Jaren Jackson was in foul trouble tonight. Well, here's the thing about that, dear audience member. He tends to get in foul trouble. Jaren Jackson is, again, let's do a compliment sandwich here. He's having the best season of his career at defending without fouling. He's only fouling 3.4 times per game. Unfortunately, that's still the 4th highest mark in the NBA. Unfortunately, he only gets to play 28 minutes. He's the Grizzlies' best or second best player, depending on how you quantify John Morant's impact. Defense is half the game. And rebounding and defending with not fouling is also part of playing defense. So, I don't want to... Taylor Jenkins made this point before the game. The guy does so much for us, we shouldn't nitpick the few things he doesn't do awesome. I agree with that. However, when we are comparing award resumes of this caliber and the players are both this good, we have to nitpick. And in this case, Evan Mobley is significantly better than Jaren Jackson Jr. at defending without fouling. And get this, Evan Mobley's per game rebounding number, I believe, is 9.2 coming in this game. Jaren Jackson Jr.'s per 100 possessions rebounding number is 9.3 per game. That's it. I'm done.
Look, I'm a voter, so I'm watching this very closely. I think there's an argument for Jaren Jackson Jr. I think there's an argument for Evan Mobley. Here's the only thing that I'm going to say on all of this. If you're somebody that is out there that is making a sweeping declaration or a definitive conclusion based on one head-to-head game between the two teams, and you're sitting there saying, I watched Evan Mobley play on defense, and I watched Jaren Jackson play on defense, and if I watch this one game, and I think Evan Mobley is a significantly better defender than Jaren Jackson Jr., I see the impact that he makes. It was clear in this game between the Cavs and the Grizzlies. Then you are a complete and utter idiot. That's all I'm going to say. If that's your takeaway, if you're basing whatever it is you're making an argument for based on this one game, because, oh my God, they were playing head to head and it was hyped up and it was a subplot of the game. You don't make any conclusion based on one game, even if they are head to head, because, idiot, there are 82 of these things and you have to take all of the data from the 82 games. And Evan Mobley is not going to get bonus points because he outplayed Jaren Jackson on February 23rd. And he looked like a better, more impactful defender on February 23rd. He's not going to get bonus points for that. In saying that, like I said, Evan's got a strong case. I'm a voter. He's my leader in the clubhouse right now because the data supports that. Not because of one game that he played head-to-head against the other guy, but because if you look at his estimated real plus-minus on defense, he's got the edge there. If you look at his defensive win shares, he's got the edge there. If you look at his defensive rating, he's got the edge there. If you look at his defensive box plus-minus, he's got the edge there. So there are so many things that I look at that are supposed to quantify a guy's defensive impact. And if Evan is going to be leading that particular player in many of those categories that I think are really, really important, and really, really telling, then I'm going to give him the edge. Now, there's one other thing here. It's not a two-player race. There are other guys in the NBA here that are going to be in the conversation. It was a one-player race. It was an only-player race. It was Wemby, and there was no debate. There was no conversation. There was no hesitation. There was no second-guessing. It was a one-player race. Now it's a bunch-of-player race. You can't just ignore everybody in Oklahoma City. Well, they got the best defense in the NBA, and a lot of their individual defenders, whether it's Hartenstein, probably not Alex Caruso, because I don't think he's going to play enough games to qualify. We'll see on that one. Whether it's Hartenstein, Caruso, Lou Dort, Shai Gilgeous, like, there are some dogs there in OKC, and they have really, really good defensive numbers from a team standpoint and from an individual standpoint that points to their impact. So voters may just look at this and say, I'm just going to take who I think is the most impactful Oklahoma City Thunder player. There are going to be some that are just like, you know what? I don't know how to decide between Evan Mobley and Jaren Jackson Jr. They're very, very close. Tiebreaker goes to the best defensive player on the best team. It could happen. There are 100 voters. Not everybody's going to look at it the same way. But I repeat my original point. If you are making any decision or any conclusion based on one game, one head-to-head matchup, you're an idiot.
In the spirit of idiocy, real quick, because I like the Thunder point, it's not just that they're the best defense in the NBA, they're one of the best defenses of our time. They are unreal. The separation that they have created with them and the number 2 defense, which I believe right now is the Clippers, it's like all-time level stuff. I think Chet Holmgren would be in this conversation if he's healthy. I think I think he's like one of the few guys who could actually challenge Wemby down the road because of the infrastructure around him. Their defense is so good that they might want to reward him down the road. But Lou Dort, this is where we get dumb. When you can just, like, his name, Dort, it's kind of like an automatopoeia, boom, bow, Dort. When you can say, wow, how did Donovan Mitchell only score 8 points in that Oklahoma City Thunder game? And all you have to say is Dort. All you have to say is just Dort. Dort happened. That's a pretty good case right there.
This is one stat, right? And you're not just going to take one stat and make a conclusion, because you're smarter than that. Everybody's smarter than that. But just to bring the point home, estimated plus minus on defense, according to dunks and threes. Number 1 in the NBA, in the 100th percentile, Alex Caruso. Number 2 in the NBA, Chet Holmgren. Number 3 in the NBA, Victor Wembanyama. Number 4, Jared Allen's favorite player, Asad Thompson. Number 5, Isaiah Hartenstein. So you've got 3 Thunder players. Again, that's just one category. It's just one statistic. You got 3 Thunder players in the top 5. And if you keep going down, there's Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. There's Lou Dort. So it's like in the top 20, there's Jalen Williams. There's Cason Wallace. In the top 20 of this thing, they got like 7 guys. It's outrageous how good their defense has been. And you obviously can't give Defensive Player of the Year to the Oklahoma City Thunder team, but like, it wouldn't be outrageous to say, like, yo, we got to give it to one of those guys because their defense has been so night and day better than everybody else.
And obviously, this isn't the only conversation that we're having when it comes to award season. We talked about 6th Man of the Year a couple days ago, but when it comes to Evan Mobley, Ty Jerome didn't bring up Defensive Player of the Year. He said most improved, right? He said most improved player. And obviously, we've seen Evan Mobley take a jump. We've talked about it at length on this podcast. But I definitely think there are multiple awards for multiple players on each team, and that's what makes this potential for an NBA Finals, and yes, I'm getting ahead of myself, so appealing. 2 of the best teams with some of the best players with the overall best schemes. You have two players for the Cavs that are in the six man of the year conversation. You have a couple of players on the Cavs that are in the most improved conversation. You have a player on the Cavs that's in the MVP conversation. And you can say the same for the OKC Thunder. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, and Chris named all the defensive players over there for the Thunder. Then you talk about most improved for Jalen Williams. You talk about like coach and executive of the year. There's all of these categories. But the player that I wanted to kind of circle this around to, that I think, and he joked about it in a conversation the other day when we were talking about DeAndre Hunter saying that, oh, he can have the award. Ty Jerome said that he believes that the NBA is simply going to give the award to Peyton Pritchard because they've been pushing it that way, right? And that's a fair statement for him to say in the conversation, and knowing that there's certain things that he can't control. But like, he's showing night in and night again that he is like one of the best scorers off the bench. He has the most steals in the NBA off the bench. There's all these other things and other categories and statistics that have led to Ty Jerome, where Kenny Atkinson is like, I saw none of this a couple of years ago, and I'm so glad that Kobe Altman has been pursuing this kid since he was about to get drafted. Again, tonight in the fourth quarter, Ty Jerome saved the Cavs from themselves. 15 of his 26 points came in the final quarter, and we talk about all the other aspects of what he was able to accomplish, but the three-point shot, he hit two big threes at that, one coming after a steal. But he had 3 buckets in the lane. And again, another funny tidbit based on conversations we have in the locker room and with Kenny Atkinson. Like, there are guys in the locker room of the Cavs that are trying to name a floater after Ty Jerome because of how good it has been this season. And I just wanted to get your guys' thoughts on the overview of everything when it comes to Ty Jerome, when it comes to the six man of the year conversation, and DeAndre Hunter and Ty Jerome having both capable reasons to be in that conversation. What do you think about the standing of the NBA when it comes to awards when we're like 25 games away from the end of the season?
Well, I just think the thing that stands out to me is how much better and more potent this roster has become in such a short time. And it's like, Karis LeVert was a big part of the team getting to the number 1 seed in the Eastern Conference. He was a big part of their second unit. He was having a really, really good year. There was 6 man of the year buzz about him at the beginning of the season. The Cavs felt he was quote unquote expendable because they had somebody like Ty. And you go from Karis LeVert being like your secondary playmaker to Ty Jerome in that role, and Ty's flourishing in it. So like Karis LeVert in a way is no longer standing in Ty Jerome's way. Now Ty can flourish, and he has the freedom to just run the second unit and not have any kind of on-court conflict with Karis LeVert, or have Karis, potentially hijacking offensive possessions or trying to make things happen on his own, create shots for himself, create shots for others. And this just gives Ty a little bit more freedom. I think it's empowered him as well. I think it's given him confidence. Since the trade of Karis LeVert, Ty's been in single digits in just one game in terms of scoring. And that was against Brooklyn when, he just didn't look like he was a great fit for how Brooklyn was playing defensively and for the kinds of players that they were putting out there on the floor. And the more and more you see of a guy like Ty Jerome, the more and more you start to feel like, yeah, you know what? He can fit in a playoff series. He can be in the rotation. He's a little bit foul prone. He has a hard time at times staying in front of guys defensively. But like, I've gone from wondering about him in a playoff environment to sitting here saying, you know what, I think he can play against Boston. And I'm not overlooking every other team in the Eastern Conference, but when you're the Cavs and you've gotten to the number 1 seed in the East and you've got the best record in the NBA, it really is all about Boston. Can you beat Boston? Can you beat Boston and get to the NBA Finals? So how many guys do you have on this roster that you feel comfortable can play against Boston and match up with Boston. And I think Ty has proven to be one of them.
I just did a quick little, you guys know I love my basketball reference deep dives. I did a quick little stat head search for guys 6'5" and under. Again, smallish guards. Ty Jerome's a big guard. We're not doing that anymore. Ty Jerome's a big guard, 6'5". Small, 6'5", 60% effective field goal percentage this year. The list of guys who have played about 1,000 minutes, Ty Jerome just passed 1,000 minutes tonight. It's 6 guys. It's really hard to score as efficiently as Ty Jerome is scoring at his size. The 3-point shooting is bananas. It's bananas.
Yeah.
It's crazy. And by the way, when we're talking his mid-range efficiency, which is mostly floater efficiency, I would like to log Teardrop Ty Jerome as the floaterish nickname. I kind of like it. I'll float it by
good alliteration there.
Yeah, well, that's just the way my brain works. You should see me fighting. If I just let my brain have free run, every word that I write in a 1,500-word story would start with S. It's just, I don't know why that's the way my brain works, but it is. Regardless, Ty Jerome, very good basketball player, very efficient scorer, and I still do have some questions about the playoff efficacy, specifically watching. Luke Kennard cooked this guy a couple of times tonight. He blew right past him a couple of times. Luke Kennard's a very good basketball player. Fun fact, Luke Kennard is the all-time leading scorer for Ohio high school basketball. Broke LeBron James's record back in the day. I think I looked it up today. He still is. That's kind of fun. Luke Kennard's good, but he's not. I would call him lightning quick. So I don't love that. Ty Jerome's another guy who will get hunted in the playoffs. Teams are going to test him to see how well he can hold up, and then it becomes an equation of how much are you getting from him as a playmaker versus how much you're giving up at the other end. And if he keeps this up, he's got nothing to worry about because he is irreplaceable as if he's playing the way he is right now. Now, if there's some slippage, if he is not scoring like one of the most efficient players at his size, and we start to see some of the athleticism work against him on defense, then I have every question. But that's getting too far afield. The story right now is this guy went from basically fringe NBA player. Like Kenny said, he envisioned him as a 12th man at the beginning of this season.
Yeah.
I don't know if you asked anyone in the middle of last summer if you would anyone have guaranteed that Ty Jerome would even be on the team still this year at this point. Like he's moved if they could have moved off of him or tried to get somebody to take him on if it doesn't go well. He's one of the best bench players in the league. As an 82 game player, he is stamped. He's going to make some money this offseason. We got a conference. I think someone was tweeting us today about should they try to bring him back? Should they prioritize him over other guys? That's a hard conversation, right? Yeah, that's a hard conversation. Choice.
They can't go out and sign anybody.
They can't go out and sign anybody, but it's still a matter of I know Dan Gilbert is willing to spend anything for a contending roster, but even if you make the conference finals, it is a big ask to push the luxury because you're not just paying whatever Ty Jerome's contract would be, you're paying whatever that is in multiples on the luxury tax, right? So it's let's say Ty Jerome is, I don't know, a $15 million a year player. You're not just asking Dan Gilbert. It's not just 4 years, 60, right? I'm not Nate Duncan. I'm no capologist. I don't know what the actual number would be, but trust me, if you make $60 million, it's much more than $60 million coming out of the owner's pocket. It's still a big ask. So I don't know what the long-term outlook is for Ty Jerome. The point is, my goodness, he is good at basketball right now. That guy can't miss. He is a really good playmaker, and he fits right in with everything this team is doing. Doesn't it feel like everything they've touched has gone to gold this year? So here's just a guy that we rolling out the end of our roster. We have not really. He's pretty good in open gym, but we've never really seen him play for an extended stretch. Oh, he's one of the best bench players in the league now. He shoots 60% effective field goal percentage as a dude
Yeah.
that's 6'5" and it's not especially quick. Like you would think, is he getting to the rim a lot? No, not really. He shoots a lot of floaters. Like what? That doesn't even make sense. It doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
That's how good he is.
I will say this to your point about Ty potentially getting hunted in the playoffs. I do think that's true. I think there's a belief inside this organization that you can have one huntable player on the court. So it's just Ty won't play with Darius. He won't. Like, I do not think Kenny will go that direction in the playoffs because I think Kenny would believe that he would have two huntable players on the court at the same time, and that's a no-no. One is okay. You can get away with that. Like, yeah, Darius is going to have to work his butt off, and he's going to have to deal with everything that comes with that physically and mentally. But he's going to have protection from the other four guys because Kenny's going to make sure that he's got four capable defenders around Darius just to protect him, just to cover up some weaknesses, just to make sure that that is not an exploitable advantage for another team. And I think the same thing goes for Ty. And I think as we continue to go on here in the second half of the season and Kenny looks for lineups and combinations and he starts paring things down and whatnot, I think you'll see a lot more Donovan and Ty together because I think Kenny believes that that is a workable combination, more workable than Darius and Ty together.
And I think it's important to note, right? Like we talked a little bit about the contract situation, and we will surely get into that a little bit more, especially later into the season. But I think what Ty Jerome said, and I've been kind of asking him the same question in different ways multiple times, trying to get him to like answer it a different way, like be more firm about his answer. More so asking like, is why do you feel like you've been different this year than you have in years past? Like he said, he's had the skill set, he just hasn't had the freedom to play like this. And right. I think that's something that we've heard from George Niang in the past. We've heard it from other players. Sam Merrill comes to mind around the locker room when it comes to Kenny Atkinson's system. And then when it comes to the contract, I think it's important to note that like even if Ty Jerome might be playing out of the Cavs' salary range, he might think to himself, I would rather play here with guys that, one, I'm very close with, and two, that he knows he can play the style that he feels like he's thriving in. And I think that's extremely important when it comes to Ty Jerome's contract and mitigating that, especially going into the off season. But the one stat that I think I've mentioned to Jimmy at length on this podcast, is that coming into the season, Ty Jerome had 6 20-point games in his entire career. 6. He's had 8 already this season. There's 25 games left. And I just continue to see the growth of Ty, as Chris said, alongside Donovan Mitchell, because we know that Kenny Atkinson has already been using that lineup a good amount. I just think it's incredibly important for this team to not only think about what it needs in the future, but also like how players are working and doing what they need to in this season. And as Jimmy said, Dan Gilbert is not afraid to spend on a title contender. So proving that they are a title contender, and that doesn't come until the playoffs, even though we keep trying to have these conversations with fans going back to the Knicks series, like everything will be decided and everything will be brought to fruition in the playoffs. There's nothing else that can do that. Just like what Chris says all the time about reputations. Those can only be fixed in the biggest scenes and the biggest stages of the biggest games.
Yeah, I think there's 2 more things here. And not to get too cap nerdy or anything like that, but majority of the time when you're talking about teams with money to spend in free agency, they stink. So is Ty going to want to go to the Washington Wizards for a little bit more of a paycheck? Or would he prefer to stay in Cleveland with his best friend, his college roommate, and a guy that he played AAU basketball with in Donovan Mitchell, a coach that has empowered him, a coach that has given him freedom, a coach that has allowed him to flourish and given him an opportunity that nobody else throughout the course of his career has been willing to give him? So that's something to consider. The other thing is the only moves that the Cavs can make here in terms of additions as we move forward based on their salary cap structure, and now you add the locked-in contract of DeAndre Hunter into the mix, projecting it forward. Like, the only additions that they can make here are minimum players. The Cavs got really, really lucky finding Ty at the number that they were able to get him at. The Cavs got really, really lucky that they got Sam Merrill on the contract that they got him at. You know, the odds of finding a minimum salary player that can do the things that Ty has done for this team this year, that's very, very slim. And the Cavs know that. So, you know, their best path forward is just keeping their own guys. You know, keeping their own guys, keeping that continuity, understanding that, yeah, you're going to go into the tax, but you're allowed to when it comes to your own players, the ones that you control the rights of. Yeah, you're probably going to run up against the apron. You might even get close to the second apron. But, like, if that means keeping guys together, then ultimately it will be worth it, because if you let Ty go, if you let Sam go, how do you replace them? Who are you going to replace them with? Again, you're going to be looking at minimum salary players. How many of those guys out there are going to be able to slide into your rotation the way that Sam and Ty are currently for the Cavs? It's almost a situation that the Cavs were in maybe about 10 years ago, where they had to quote-unquote overpay J.R. Smith and quote-unquote overpay Tristan Thompson, because they knew if they didn't pay those guys, they couldn't go out there and replace them anyway, given their salary cap situation. And the Cavs are kind of in that same kind of salary cap situation. The other thing that I'll say, just adding all of this to it, is, you know, yes, Ty is having a great year. And yes, he's in the sixth man of the year conversation. But is he the kind of A-list free agent that teams are going to line up and break the bank for? Are there teams out there that are honestly looking at him as a starting caliber point guard? I think we have to ask that question, right? So if he falls in the range of what Peyton Pritchard is making, you know, that's affordable for the Cavs. That's doable for the Cavs. And, you know, there aren't too many teams that have a ton of money to spend this offseason. And if you do have a bunch of money to spend this offseason, are you giving 15 to 18 million of that to Ty Jerome?
These are all very fair questions. I think for the most part, Chris is right by saying, like, it's a no-brainer for Ty Jerome to have interest in coming back. And if he looks anything like this in the playoffs, it's a no-brainer for the for the Cavs to want him back. I would say that there are levels to this. That we all know the old saying, right? There are 82 game players and there are 16 game players. I think in these kind of conversations with the Cavs, as it pertains to the Cavs, I'd add a third level to that. There's 82 game players, there's 16 game players, then there's 7 game players. There's Boston. How do you survive against Boston? Playoffs are different from the regular season. A playoff series against Boston is different than a playoff series against, pick a name out of a hat, the Pistons. I like that Cade Cunningham said, "I was sizzling, don't touch me tonight." So that's why he came to my head. I like that. That's different. So Ty Jerome can do this now. Ty Jerome can do this in the first and the second round. And then if he gets to Boston, where there's really nowhere to hide, and they are on defense, I mean, and they are absolutely ruthless about hunting guys, and it becomes an issue. And by the way, it's much harder to score against Boston because there's no one really to target on defense either. Then we have a different conversation. But I think for the most part, yes, it makes a lot of sense. I also want to say real quick that what Ethan was talking about with Ty Jerome, I want to underline the quote that Ty gave after the game today. This, because he really meant it. Like, he smiled a little bit when he said it. Ethan asked him, why didn't something about why Kenny is surprised. He didn't see this. Kenny said tonight he has never really saw anything like this from Ty in Golden State. And Nathan said, why is that? This guy who played on a team with Steph Curry and Klay Thompson and a bunch of lottery picks with a straight face, he said, they just didn't give me a chance. That's amazing. Yep. That's amazing confidence. I think that's kind of gives you a window into how we got here with Ty Jerome. And it's, that just needs to be underlined. It's crazy that he said that, but he's proving himself right. He's so crazy that he's not crazy, if that makes any sense.
Irrational 100%. Confidence, man, is something that you need to have.
Yep, that's exactly what Kenny Atkinson said about Darius Garland, Donovan Mitchell, and I think Ty Jerome, and as Chris put it in his article post-game, like on every basket that he made, he was talking crap to somebody. It could have been a fan. It could have been the Memphis Grizzlies bench. Could have been the Cavs bench, for all we know. And we've heard this storyline from the Cavs all season. Like, everybody was like, George Niang talks a lot of crap. But if you really want to know who talks the most stuff, it's Ty Jerome and Sam Merrill, which is insane because we talk about how these guys have kind of come into their own just in the last couple of seasons. But that's how kind of irrational confidence you need, especially as a role player fighting for nickel and dimes to stay in the NBA and stay out of the G League. But I'm going to end this podcast with this statement and this statistic. The Cavs have clinched a spot in the postseason, at least in the play-in tournament, and their magic number to clinch a playoff berth is 6. Playoffs.
How do you think the Cavs match up in a play-in matchup against who would be the Nets? The Nets are surging. That pressure, you see, the Nets are putting some full court pressure on teams. Jordy Fernandez, come on. But Jordy Fernandez is coaching his tail off. That should be said. He's coaching his tail off. That team's trying to tank. He won't let him.
That's the problem with the Nets. They're trying so hard to tank, and their coach is too good. They hired too good of a coach. They should have waited a year. Well, maybe it would have been available next year.
It's also crazy to think that the Cavs are 1 win away from matching their season win total last year, and it's crazy enough to think that the Cavs are 2 wins away from surpassing their win prop bets that had coming into the season. But with all that being said, that'll wrap up.
Took the over because they are gonna smash that.
Okay, I gotta ask this before we get out. Do y'all think that somebody asked me on the radio today, do you think that the Cavs are going to surpass their regular season franchise record of 66 games?
Oh, that's interesting.
They have to win, I think it's 19 more games at this point? They
have to win 19 more games.
Yeah, 19 more games out of 25.
I mean, look, you always have to account for the end of season and resting guys down the stretch, and trying to get them in the best shape possible going into the playoffs. And there is a bigger picture plan, but it is so hard to beat this team. It's so hard to beat this team. Like, Boston could on Friday, but like beyond that, they're probably going to be favored in every single game the rest of the way, maybe with the exception of on the road in Memphis.
This
right?
sentence
and that doesn't guarantee.
The sentence just needs to be uttered. I'm sorry, Chris, as we talk about this. They didn't have Darius Garland today, and they beat the second best team in the West. There are 4 teams in the NBA who have a top 10 offense and top 10 defense. 2 of them played tonight. One of them didn't have one of their all-star players. And the Cavs controlled the game. It was a good game, but they controlled it.
To further this point, I had a New York writer the other night come up to me and say, hey, man, like, I think Boston's going to go on a tear down the stretch. Any chance they catch the Cavs? And I use the line that I always use. I was taught a long time ago by one of my mentors, never say never, but I laughed at him. I was like, what evidence have you seen that the Cavs are going to collapse down the stretch here? What evidence have you seen that they're going to go on this 3-game losing streak or 4-game losing. They have one 3-game losing streak all season long. So again, just because you're favored in all these games down the stretch, and the Cavs are going to be favored in a bunch of them, maybe all but 2 of them down the stretch, that doesn't guarantee wins. And it doesn't mean that the favored team always wins. If that was the case, there wouldn't be those shiny buildings in Vegas where everybody in Vegas says, "Ha ha, sucker, got you again." But it's so hard to beat the Cavs. They have such a wide margin for error. They have so many pathways to success. They have so many ways that they can beat opponents. So it would not surprise me. I think this team has the makeup. I think this team has the talent. I think this team has the depth to surpass the franchise record for wins. Absolutely, I do. And here's the other thing. We know this about these players. Okay, they can say all these different things. If they have a chance at history, they're going to want it. Okay? They're going to want it. And they're going to be motivated by it. It's not win at all cost. It's not throw the big picture plan to the side. But it's, hey, let's talk about this. If they get close and they start to feel that it's real, they're going to want it.
Even if it gets weird at the end of the regular season and they start resting a bunch of guys, 2 things. Number one, other teams are going to do that too. Either established teams that have their seating mostly established, or more importantly, these tanking teams. Once the calendar hits March, oh boy, the tank starts rolling. It gets ugly. It gets ugly out there. And the other thing is, you can't rest everybody. And the Cavs are capable like 1 to 13. Like, you're telling me, so let's say the entire core 4 rest. Ty Jerome, DeAndre Hunter, Sam Merrill, they're going to beat some people. You better come to play against Ty Jerome, DeAndre Hunter, and Sam Merrill. They don't mess around.
Right. So, like, the other thing is, are the other teams capable of still beating a resting Cavs team? Because they might rest people against Chicago, road home back-to-back, first game of back-to-back, Miami the next night. But it's like, is Chicago currently riding the treadmill of mediocrity for maybe eternity? Maybe eternity. Like, are they equipped to even beat a watered-down Cavs team? And then you start going down the schedule and you say, okay, Utah. Like, if they want to rest people at the end of a road trip or toward the end of a road trip, is whatever version of Utah that they throw out there, are they good enough to beat an undermanned Cavs team? Chicago again at the end of the season. So, like, the Cavs with their, like Jimmy said, the Cavs with an undermanned roster or a watered-down roster is still very, very capable of winning these games. And they play incredibly hard on a nightly basis.
To paraphrase the great Charles Barkley, I don't know much about the Utah Jazz's top 7 rotation, but they're in trouble. Like, no matter who is playing, no matter who the Cavs are playing that night.
Thank you guys for that, and for sticking around for an hour. With that being said, that'll wrap up today's episode of the Wine and Gold Talk podcast. But remember to become a Cavs Insider and interact with Chris, me, and Jimmy by subscribing to Subtext. This is where you can sign up for a 14-day free trial, or visit cleveland.com/Cavs and click on the blue bar at the top of the page to subscribe for $3.99 a month. If you don't like it, that's fine. All you have to do is text the word STOP. It's easy. We can tell you that the people who signed up stick around, because this is the best way to get insider coverage on the Cavs from me, Chris, and Jimmy. This isn't just our podcast, it's your podcast. And the only way to have your voice heard is through Subtext. Y'all be safe. We out.